Conventions. Now, this is being included in some of the political science textbooks now across the country?
Yes, it is. Not only in the United States, but in other countries, I've been told. The basic framework is valid anywhere. In other words, you can go to the former Soviet Union, you can go to France or England or Germany or Japan, and you can look at their political system as a whole and see where it falls on that map. It's going to be a distribution. It's going to be a bell curve. It's going to be. It's going to look kind of like a fried egg with a lump in the middle and a ring around it. And then you can point to individual parties and individual politicians and say, okay, this party represents this position, and within the context of their society, they're conservatives or radicals.
And there's even a book in England that mentioned you as being one of the top 1,000 intellectuals, top 2,000 intellectuals of this century.
The last century, the 20th
century.
Yeah.
So we don't have a copy of that book here, unfortunately.
I don't place a lot of credence in that, Mark. I have been told that they did that because of the expanding influence of the Nolan chart. That it is a conceptual breakthrough, or what do you want to call it, that has changed the minds of at least millions of people and perhaps tens of millions. What's interesting is not only that it's a tool that enables people to analyze what's going on in the political world more accurately and more intelligently, but also it performs what I call an irreversible change in your mind if you take it. Once you go to the advocate site or any site that has the chart and has the quiz and you find out where you fall on it, once you understand that there is more than a single straight line left to right, it's almost impossible to go back, to collapse your thinking back to the old left-right spectrum. So it's what they call a meme. It is changing the minds of people, and at least 2 million so far, probably many more than that. That doesn't sound like a lot in a world of 6 billion people, but when you consider that probably less than 1% of the world's population thinks about political affairs, thinks about things like how do you classify and analyze political systems. All of a sudden, instead of 6 billion, you're talking like 60 million. So now at least 3, 4, 5%, and probably more like 20% of the people who would consider themselves politically astute.
So when you were a student, did you have this chart? You didn't have it yet?
No, I had to invent it because it did not exist. And now it does exist, and it's continuing to accelerate in its acceptance. As you said, there were something like 40,000 pages came up when you typed in Nolan chart on a search engine, and I would suspect that a year from now it'll probably be 60 or 80,000, and 10 years, it's probably been doubling every year or close to it.
Now, and you don't have this copyrighted, so what if someone made, I guess you would be able to stop someone who made a chart that used your spectrum in some kind of a negative way, or what we as libertarians would consider
Many
a negative
people
way.
have, as you said, one of the first sites that comes up when you type in Nolan chart is a website called Variations on the Nolan chart. And that website, as you said, has links to numerous websites that present suggested changes or improvements. Some of them may be improvements, some of them may not be. But the fact that it's widely enough recognized, quote, important enough for a lot of people to spend a lot of time thinking about ways to refine it, challenge it, whatever, is in itself, I think, an indication of a fair degree of acceptance.
Yeah, I think that, the Nolan chart is probably going to continue to become more and more relevant as time goes on politically in helping people map out our politicians, because as you were explaining earlier, there's really, it's pretty much impossible to use the older model now.
That's not, well, the sad thing is, whatever model you use, you realize that in effect they're all clustered together in a tight little bunch pretty near the middle. And closer to the middle and closer to the bottom. They're clustered in what I would call the low center. With some, in the high center, a few mavericks like Ron Paul being in the Libertarian area, a few other mavericks, somebody like Ralph Nader, whom we as libertarians would agree with on many social issues, but not very much on economic, is pretty much a classic left liberal type. 40 years ago, Ralph Nader would have been Hubert Humphrey. Or the things that Ralph Nader talks about would have constituted the left wing of the Democratic Party. Now the Democratic Party is pulled in toward the center. They still want strong controls on the economy, but they've really abandoned a lot of the civil liberties issue. Where are the Democrats when it comes to censorship? They're for it.
They voted for the Patriot Act.
They voted for the Patriot Act. They support the war on drugs. Where are the pro-civil liberties Democrats? There's a few people like Nat Hentoff and others that are good, staunch soldiers in the war for individual liberties on the civil liberties front, but they're getting to be very few and far between. What, Nat Hentoff's like 75 or something?
Yeah, they're in there, but they're basically just in both the Republican and Democratic parties. It's a train, you know, that's moving in one direction, and people get on board hoping they're going to influence that party, but they end up just shoveling more coal into the same engine of the people that are in control of that party. I always hear the idea, oh, I'm in the Republican Party, the Democratic Party, because I want to reform it and move it more towards a libertarian or some other area.
Or green or whatever.
Yeah. I always say, you know, think of these parties as just ships and they're sinking, and when you get aboard them to try to save them, you're just adding to their weight and helping them sink quicker.
Well, that's one way of putting it. The real fallacy of people trying to influence one of the major parties from within is that typically you don't get promoted to you don't get into a policy-making position until you've shown through many, many years of grunt work that you're quote, a loyal team member, which means that anybody who gets in the Republican Party and stands up and challenges the Bush administration and says, you know, Ashcroft is an evil man, you know, they're not going to get to be state chair in the Republican Party, let alone a national candidate.
That's very true.
So, yeah, it's an exercise in futility.
So if anyone else out there would like any more information about the Libertarian Party, you can find us on the web at lp.org. You can also find the Nolan chart just by going into any search engine, typing in Nolan chart, or going to self-gov.org and then click on quiz. And if you'd like to register to vote as a Libertarian, you can do so at your post office and usually many places online. So please go and get more information if you're interested in what we're saying. What would you say to encourage other people to get involved in the Libertarian Party as you have over the last 30 years as one of the founding members?
Well, I would say wake up and look what's happening to this country. Look at what George W. Bush, a president representing the nominal, quote, less government party, has done. George Bush has expanded the size, the cost, the power, the intrusiveness of government more than any president, at least since LBJ. There are a lot of interesting parallels between Bush and LBJ, incidentally, in terms of they're both from Texas. They both have ties to the oil industry. They both got us into an undeclared, unconstitutional war overseas. They both proposed massive increases in welfare spending.
We have to wrap up. Thank you for coming out, and we'll see you next time on the Libertarian Alternative.
Thanks.
Don't give up, learn to live, show the world you're painted in. The colors there are so deep and rich. Who could resist this magical chill? Hold the freedom in your hands, feel so smooth it never ends. Watch your fears begin